Sometimes we have several different states in our application, and when we switch states between these several states, we want to animate some UI components that we have in our app. For example, between the connected state and disconnected state in a networking app, we might want to run several transitions on on several different components, like on our buttons, or a button, a text, a background color, and things like that. And because we want often to do this on several different components at the same time, we need some efficient capability to do this. The API in Jetpack Compose that allows us to do this kind of transition efficiently is called the Transition API, and in this video I'm going to show you how to use it. So let's get started by creating a new project in Android Studio. I press New Project, select Empty Compose Activity Next, and I name it Compose Transitions. Package name, check it. Save location, I check. Minimum SDK, check. And finish. Wait for the application to be created. Alright, our application is created. I minimize the Project Explorer part and also remove the default composables added by Android Studio. I remove this surface from the application theme. I want to add my own content, and then I define a composable here. I name it Transition Demo. I want to define my transition here and show you how to use it. I also make it preview so that we can have a preview here. Note that in order to have interactive testing of your UI here and also animation previews, you have to enable experimental features from from Android Studio settings. So I go to Android Studio settings. On Linux it is from the file menu. I go to experimental section, and here make sure that enable interactive and animation preview tools is selected. And now I can be sure that I will have previews. The first step in creating transitions in Jetpack Compose is by defining your transition, your different transition states. And because we want to create a simple transition that changes state between connected and disconnected, for example in a VPN application or in a networking application, we need an enum class, or at least we can say we can do this using an enum class and define our states in it. I create an enum class and name it connection and give it two members, connected and disconnected. And then I create my first state to give to the transition, because the transition needs to start with an initial target state. So I define my initial state here. I name it var and name it connection state or conState for short, by remember. I use delegate for that. Remember, import remember, mutable state of, import this as well, and for its value I pass in one of these members. I pass in disconnected. I want the application UI to have the disconnected state at first. Connection dot disconnected. Because this is delegate, we need to make sure that get value and set value is imported. And now I can use this state to create my transition object. After creating my transition object, I will be able to create child transitions that will manage different parts of my UI when switching between the two states. So I create my transition, val transition, I name it, by update transition. I don't use by here, just equals update transition, import update transition. This allows me to create a parent transition and update its state to our desired state, our desired initial state. So I pass in conState for that. And it is recommended to add the label parameter as well. So this is target state, and for the label I pass in parent transition. Now, as I said, I create child transitions. Imagine we want to have a simple box, a simple connection state box that shows connected when the state is connected and shows disconnected when the state is disconnected. And also, while that state is switched to connected, we have round corners and also bigger text. So I'm going to create two child transitions, one for the round corners and the other for the text size. So while corner size by transition, this is the way we use transition. I call the extension function of animate float that is callable on transition. Import animate float. Because the corner size is float, I animate it with float, animate float, and I'm gonna pass in the label and target value by state. And I'm gonna skip transition spec for now because it has a default transition. I'm not going to customize it for now. So label corner size, and the other is target value by state. This is a lambda that will receive the current state, which allows us to decide how to modify our UI based on this state. So here I pass in the state to the lambda, and as you can see, it receives the state and returns a float. So I say when state, this is the decision making part, when the state is connection dot connected, then I will return 25F. Otherwise I'm gonna return 0F. I don't want to have a round corner when the application is not connected. So that's it for animate float. Next, let's create our text size transition. Text size by transition dot animate float again. I use float again, and note that there are other extension functions you can use based on your application needs. For example, as you can see here, we have animate DP, animate int offset, animate offset, rect, size, value, and color. So animate float, actually for the corner size we can use animate DP, because we can also specify corner size with DP units. So 25 DP, I return 25 DP here and 0 DP here. So pass in the label for animate float for the text size, and then the target value by state. By this state, I'm gonna have this target value. This is the meaning of this parameter. So when state is connection dot connected, then I'm gonna use, for example, 30F for the text size, and later I will convert this to SP for the text. I will create SP units from this value, and else otherwise, which leaves us only with one other option, which is connection dot disconnected. Otherwise return, actually when it is disconnected we will return 30F, and when it's connected we will return 50F. Okay, now we have two transitions which we can use. I'm gonna create a box to show that. So let's create a box here, a modifier for the box, fill max size, give it a padding of 16 depth, for example, and then inside the body of the box I'm gonna create another box that will be responsible to show our transitions and actually to show our connection state with transitions. So I give this box modifier as well, modifier, and dot size. I give it a size, actually let's give it a size of wrap content size, and let's give it border with the size of 2 depth and the color of color.black. importing color and the shape of rounded corner shape. Here is where I will pass my corner size. Corner size. Okay. Rounded corner shape and the border. Also, let's add a clickable to allow us to switch between the two states. Clickable, import clickable, and in the body of the clickable lambda I will switch the two states. Connection state, con state equals if con state equals connection dot connected, then switch it to connection dot disconnected, otherwise connection dot connected. All right, and let's add a text here. For string resource, I give it a string resource to load the text for this label, and r.string dot, let's decide what text to show. If it is connected, we will show connected, and if the state is disconnected, we will show connect. So if con state equals connection dot connected, then we will return disconnect. Else we will return string resource r.string dot connect. When the state is disconnected, we will display connect. Let's go to our string resources file, strings, and create two string items, string name, connect with the value of connect, and disconnect with the value of disconnect. Back to our code. Let's also make sure that we add a padding for the text with modifier padding 16 depth. And one important parameter that I will need to use is actually the text size, and this will show our transition. Text font size. For the font size I use my text size, but we will see an error here. You can see that the value passed to font size needs to be SP, because we often specify text units with SP. So what I'm gonna do is create an SP unit here, So I say, because the type is text unit, I say text unit. I create a text unit and I pass in my text size value, which I know is float, and specify sp here. Text unit type.sp. Note that this function text unit, if you open it, does have an annotation of experimental unit API. So you need to annotate your composable with this special annotation. Experimental unit API. I add this annotation to transition demo. That's imported. Now the error will be gone. And we can give our text a line of center. Text align dot center. Import text align. And also make sure that you center the text inside your box. So the second box, which has wrap content size, should be aligned in the center of the parent box. So I say align alignment dot center. Like this. And now, as you can see, we have used both our transitions of corner size and text size in our UI components, which are basically two nested boxes, and the nested box has used those transitions, one for its border size, one for its corner size, which determines its roundness, and the other for the text that it contains, for the size of the text actually. So let's refresh our preview and see how it works here. We can test our animation in this preview pane or run our composable on our device and see the result. Alright, rendering preview 1 of 1. We have only one preview, so it is rendered. And to test the animation and to test the clickable function of my box, I enable this feature, start interactive mode. I press this button. The button with the finger icon, and I press connect. There we go. You can see that we had a transition from the connect state to disconnect, and now if I press disconnect, we will transition back to connect. Sometimes the preview pane just doesn't work as expected, and what we do here in this state, we run it on our device to see the result. So I stop interactive mode and run it on the device. Okay, Gradle build finished, and soon the application will be fired up in the device. Installing and launching. Okay, the problem is that we forgot to add transition demo to the content. So transition demo, let's call it here, and because it uses experimental unit API, let's add this annotation to onCreate as well. Experimental unit API, and run the app again. Okay, we see our button here, and let's connect. Disconnect. We see the transition from connect to disconnect, and actually we perform the transition from the state of disconnected to connected, and now we can perform the transition from the connected state to disconnected by clicking the spikes again. There we go. You can see that there are smooth transitions between the two states. Both the text size and the corner size are animated with our transition system, and both of these transitions are performed at the same time based on the parent transition, and they are managed by the parent transition. And one more thing before I wrap up this video is adding a transition spec that changes the way the transition and the transitions animation is performed, and we pass that as the parameter of transition spec to our transitions animation extension functions. For example, for the text size, I'm gonna customize my animation by passing transition spec. I use transition spec here, and for the transition, if you look at it, we can have a transition that is a child of finite animation spec. So we can use an animation like spring, which we know is finite, and for the spring I'm gonna use a damping ratio of spring damping ratio high bouncy. So spring dot damping ratio high bouncy. This might not be exactly what you want to use for your transition spec, but to showcase the way we customize transition specs for our transitions, I'm gonna use this with this parameter. Spring damping ratio. Spring spec, finite animation spec. So note that this is also the value of this parameter has to be a lambda, and because it is a lambda, I need to wrap it in lambda, and like this. And I want to run the transition, actually run this spring transition when we are animating from the disconnected state to connected state, and not vice versa, not in both transitions, only in one of them. So here I check my current state with when when I say when we are transitioning from disconnected to connected. Disconnected connection state dot disconnected is transitioning to. This is an infix function that we can use here. Let's maximize the code section to have more space. When disconnected is transitioning to connected, then use this spring animation. Otherwise, which means when we are transitioning from connected state to disconnected, we will use a simple tween animation. So I say tween with the duration of 300 milliseconds. And you can see that that's it for transition spec and customizing transition spec. You can decide based on the current transition that is running which animation to use and what animation to use, and customize the type and properties of that type of animation. Here in the transition from disconnected to connected, we will run a spring transition, a spring animation, and when we transition from the connected state to disconnected, which is the opposite of the other transition, we will use a simple tween animation. So now let's run our application on the device and see the applied changes for the transitions. Connect. There we go. My system is a little bit laggy, but so naturally you didn't see it very well, but if we do it again, you can see that it's tween based now to this state, transition to this state, but the other transition has a spring animation, tween, spring, tween, spring. Okay, that's it for transitions. This was a simple introduction to transitions in Jetpack Compose. I hope that you liked it and found this lecture useful.